Judge, have you ever discussed Special Counsel Mueller or his investigation with anyone?
Well, it's in the news every day.
Have you discussed it with anyone?
With other judges, I know.
Have you discussed Mueller or his investigation with anyone at Kasowitz, Benson, and Torres, the law firm founded by Mark Kasowitz, President Trump's personal lawyer? Be sure about your answer, sir.
Well, I'm not remembering, but if you have something you...
This is Tom Clark at Unfurled TV. Welcome to the Sexual Abuse of Brett Kavanaugh series, where I do my best to analyze Justice Kavanaugh's confirmation process, such as it was, through the lens of someone that has practiced law and is also a nationalist and a libertarian. Today I want to look at Senator Kamala Harris's questioning of Justice Kavanaugh on whether or not he had talked about the Robert Mueller investigation. So what is all of this about? Well, I think it's a pretty safe bet that Senator Harris was trying to demonstrate collusion between the White House and the federal bench. I don't know what the federal law is, but generally speaking, it's a big violation of professional ethics for a judge to be talking about a legal case that is likely to come before him or her. To be talking to one of the parties, witnesses, or lawyers involved in that case, if the other party or parties aren't present. People in the profession call that an ex parte communication. So let's start off with communications outside of the courtroom that you want lawyers to have with judges. Practicing law, it's very complicated and it's perilous, really. And the system, I think, is right to allow attorneys and judges to talk with each other, outside of the courtroom, informally, in order for everyone to be efficient and also to help each other learn. A new judge can avoid making a lot of mistakes by letting counsel get with him or her and basically go over the areas of law that the attorneys think the judge should be brushing up on or that are likely to be at issue. And the attorneys can sort of run the judge through how the facts of the case may apply to the law that the attorneys are saying is relevant. Now, in this case, it's both up to the attorneys and the judge to do their own homework, but that's a failing on their part if they just take each other's position as the gospel for it. The attorneys and judges should never do that. They should listen to each other and then do their own homework. That's how it works the best. Anyway. Anyway, it's probably more common that the reverse happens where the judge kind of, talks about the legal issues and gives you a kind of a non-committal view of the law, kind of touching upon the facts that are before him in the paperwork, and he'll talk about, issues and procedures to go ahead and get to the bottom of these kind of issues, how that might or might not be willing to apply the case, and what he, just kind of what his general thinking is. And that can help the lawyers, get to the issues of that the court are going to have in deciding the case a lot, with a ton more of efficiency. Now, before I became an attorney, I was aware of these backroom talks, and I thought it was unethical. And to be honest, if done improperly, it can be unethical. It's unethical when one of the attorneys is involved and they're trying to please the other attorneys or the judge, or just being lazy and not doing their due diligence, taking whatever that the judge or the other attorneys say and just saying, okay, well, they must be right. You can't do that as an attorney. You have to listen to what they're saying, then you have to go double check what they're saying. In other words, there are attorneys that will go into meetings and they will sell their clients out. I've seen it. Or they'll let their client be railroaded. I've seen it by the justice system. Or the attorney takes what is said in those types of meetings as the be-all, end-all of the law. I've seen all of it. But generally, that's not what goes on. And that is not a fault of the meetings. That is a fault of the unethical attorney involved. And the unethical attorney is going to be unethical whether there's meetings or not. Okay, so taking away these meetings is not going to be helpful. It's only going to make unethical attorneys, the problems with them, even worse, in my view. Think of it as a class assignment at these meetings. Everyone is working to identify things, like I said, to be studied and give their impressions on the subject. But it's not the end of the discussion. It's just kind of the beginning. Then most of the time, everyone needs to go back to their office and independently check the veracity of what everyone else, including themselves, was presenting. That's how it works, generally speaking. This is one of the best ways for people to reduce litigation costs. Spending a half hour with a judge and opposing counsel can really help your client avoid unnecessary expenses. I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars here. In minor cases, in almost all my cases, they almost all involve less than $500,000 being on the table. And most of the criminal cases I was involved in, the defendant was looking at, maybe at most, for all practical purposes, a couple weeks in jail and maybe a few $1,000s in fines. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a big deal, but I mean, it's not the end of the world either. I mean, these are cases where your client doesn't want you to spend $100,000 going through all of the possible legal maneuvers you can go through when the issue is only a $20,000 issue. So, you see what I'm saying? They want their cases to be done in an efficient manner so it doesn't cost them a lot. Now, in cases where the stakes are a lot higher, maybe that's not the case. But in most of the, run-of-the-mill cases in your towns and cities, the ones that impact the most people, these are smaller cases, and they need efficiencies. Basically, you want to encourage judges and attorneys to talking to each other, educating each other, and working towards eliminating unnecessary court time that is going to lead to dead ends, to be frank about it. And I know I've said this, but it needs to be clear. Your attorney, when he or she is in those meetings, they are charged with still protecting your confidences and your case. Attorneys, that go into those meetings and roll over, divulge information that they shouldn't without, not doing his or her own research, that is on your attorney. That is a problem with that attorney. So if the judge says something in a meeting that should not be the end all of the case. Okay. So say the judge says, well, I'm going to rule against letting this piece of evidence in. And you're like, Judge, no way, man. You cannot do that. No, that's why I'm going to do it if you bring it before me. And I said, well, I'm going to bring it before you because you're wrong. And then you go out and you make your case known on the record so that it can be appealed. Now, if the judge says, hey, I'm not going to admit that evidence because X, Y, and Z, and you're just going to waste the time arguing that if you come in for a day and argue that, you're just going to spend a lot of money. And then you go back and you look at the law and look at what he was talking about. And he's like, God dang it, he is right. The judge just saved your client thousands of dollars. And you from looking like a buffoon in front of your client. So that's how the meetings are supposed to work, in my view. So yeah, there's definitely drawbacks to these meetings, but the benefits far outweigh the drawbacks. Now, that's the general rule about talking to judges when it comes to cases that are before the court or likely to come before the court when both parties are involved. And those are just normal communications with the judge, parties' communications with the judge when both parties are present. The problem comes, the more serious issue comes when there's ex parte communications with the judge. In other words, the judge is talking with one party at a time about the case. But before I go there, let me talk about another issue about judges and lawyers. All right. They like to talk about cases that are in the news, that have been fully processed, like a case that has been adjudicated in, say, the Supreme Court or your state Supreme Court, or even in the district court, and it doesn't, the time for appeals has passed. The case is just over with. It's been fully processed. Now, when lawyers and judges get together and talk about those kind of cases, that's again a learning process. It helps people keep abreast of all the changes in the law, and that's very important. Again, this is one of the best ways for attorneys to keep your legal fees down. Basically, if you're talking to a judge, you're there by yourself and you're talking about a case that's not likely to become before him, or it's a done case, it's done and over. Man, that can be very educating to talk to each other about those cases. There's some cases that the facts are confidential and the records are sealed, so you're not going to be able to talk about those. But the publicly published cases, yeah, you get to go over those. It can be quite addictive and appealing way to learn your legal skills, talking to people. Some people learn by reading a book, and some people learn by talking to others, and most people learn from a synthesis of those things, and that's been my experience anyway. These are very useful tools. So if you want an educated and informed legal system, you want the people in the professions to be able to communicate each other with these informal settings, whether it's, about cases not before the judge, then who cares? Let them talk. If it's a case before the judge, then, both parties need to be present to talk. Just have those kind of safeguards in place, and everything should be as good as it can possibly be. You want this because you want your attorneys and your judges to know the law. That's where the learning goes on. I mean, in your specific case, maybe you want the judge not to know the law and in a certain area because it benefits you. But the general public, everyone will tend to benefit in the community from these people talking with each other. Ideally, that's where you want the learning to happen. Court time, generally speaking, you don't want your attorney learning in front of a jury. That's going to cost you a lot of money. That's going to cost the community a lot of money. All right, then, with regards to the Mueller investigation, it's perfectly proper for almost all judges to be freely discussing that case and its implications, issues, and side issues, except for federal judges in the District of Columbia jurisdiction, because that is going to be the circuit that's going to be the set of judges that are most likely to be involved in any legal matters arising in the case and that need to be settled by the judges. So the federal DC judges, they definitely need to be more guarded, but still, they should be able to talk to their fellow judges and staff within that district because, again, you don't want judges to live in a bubble and not have anybody to bounce ideas and theories off of. That's a recipe for, what do I want to call it? Inbred thinking. You want the judges to be able to talk to each other and you want them to be able to talk to the staff within the circuit, even about cases that are presently before them. Otherwise, like I said, your brain will see things one way and you won't see all of the nuances of it. And somebody, an intern on your staff, another judge will talk to you and say, but Judge, what about this? And you're like, oh my God, I'm glad you said something about that. Guys, I mean, seriously, judges are not God creatures. They're fallible humans just like the rest of us. And, some of them are really, really good, but they're still fallible, okay? So you want them to test their ideas with people that are also charged with keeping the judge's ethics intact and the judge's obligations intact. But with people outside of the judge's staff and judges that are not in the circuit, the judge definitely should be guarded with the case that, especially big cases that are looking like they may be coming up in that jurisdiction. They should avoid digging into the details of a big case like that with everybody except, like I say, the staff and other judges. This is mainly to avoid turning the judicial branch into a political circus where, reporters are going for the sound bites and getting judges to take swipe at the opinions of other judges. I mean, you don't want that crazy newspaper cycle circus right there in the center of the decision makers. You want to kind of hold all that at bay. So a more impartial decision-making process can occur. So, in my opinion, it would be improper for Judge Kavanaugh to be talking about the Mueller investigation to anyone that wasn't, like I say, a member of the court staff. But that wouldn't necessarily disqualify him from sitting on the Supreme Court if he did. Mistakes are made all the time, and if this is not a trend with the judge but a mere lapse, then he would still easily have my support, even though it's my understanding he's not exactly a champion of the Fourth Amendment, and I am, but, I really haven't looked at it that closely, so maybe that's unfair. But there's a big difference between somebody, catching you in the hall and saying, hey, what do you think about Judge, what do you think about, Robert Mueller? I mean, isn't he getting out of hand? And just, well, maybe. That's one thing. I mean, that is a mistake, okay? But if you're meeting with the president's private law firm and discussing the nuts and the bolts of the case and advising that firm on how to proceed without the other party being present, then Judge Kavanaugh would lose my support in that case. That is out and out corruption. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's stacking the deck of a case before the case is even before the judge. And the judge is using his inside knowledge. Maybe he wouldn't be sitting on the case, but he's going to probably, there's a good chance he can be talking to another judge that will be hearing that case that might come before him. So the judges should be very circumspect of a very public issue going on in their jurisdiction, and knowing that very well could become before them. They should not be talking to lawyers about those potential cases in detail in a way that matters. So as you can see, this issue about talking to lawyers about the Mueller case can get dicey or not. But it's depending on who it was with and the context and depth of the details of the conversation. Judge Kavanaugh, or Justice Kavanaugh now, he's certainly aware of the spectrum of the negative side of having communications with judges, going from just mere bad optics to misstep to outright corruption. So that's why the judge, the then judge, when he was before the Senate committee for his confirmation, was being very careful here. Similarly, Senator Kamala Harris, she's a former prosecutor. She's also very aware of these rules, and she knows that if he can paint him as being corrupt, that if she can get that to stick, Judge Kavanaugh could easily lose the support of some Republicans, and that would have tanked his nomination. Unfortunately for Harris and her staff, they're either terrible prosecutors or never had anything of substance against, in their files against the judge. They just didn't have anything. There was no there. In other words, in my opinion, she was on a fishing expedition and tried to use a bluff to get the judge to say something that she could hang him with. So think about it. If she had any credible evidence that Judge Kavanaugh had spoken to someone from the firm that represented President Trump, the thing to do in that case was to ask Kavanaugh directly, did you speak to Mr. So-and-so? And then if the judge says yes, then you got him because he's admitted it. But if he says no, you still got him because you have the evidence and you just present the evidence. So if Harris had proof that the judge did this thing, she's won. She's already won if she had the evidence. If Harris asked, did you speak to Mr. So-and-so about the Mueller investigation? Now, the judge here, had he done so, has the option of lying or telling the truth, and then Senator Harris would have the option of submitting, like I say, the evidence that disproves what the judge says. But we never got to that point. And there's a most likely reason for that, right? The most likely reason for Senator Harris not naming someone is because she didn't have the name to give. Most likely she was on a fishing expedition here and it went nowhere because she had nothing. It was only innuendo. It was only a smear. And that's most likely, in my opinion, what happened. On the other hand, if she did have something, she's totally and utterly incompetent or corrupt. It's got to be one of those three things. Now, what about the judge? He admitted to talking to court staff about the case, but when you are aware that someone is about to accuse you of out-and-out judicial corruption, this is very material to his confirmation. This isn't whether he drinks beer or not when he was a kid. This is an issue that would send lawyers crazy. I mean, the senators that were lawyers, I'm thinking like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, Lindsey Graham and those guys. If he had been out and out corrupt about this case, acting totally unethical in this with this Mueller investigation, I'm confident that some of those senators with legal training would just like, okay, he can't be Supreme Court justice. He's been shown to be corrupt. So if you're on the hot seat and you're sitting there with a bunch of lawyers looking down at you, and they're digging into this thing that is, leading you to the judicial gallows, as it were, okay, you're going to start questioning yourself, like, did I make a mistake? Did I talk to somebody I shouldn't have? I know I talked to people, but you're going to be sitting there searching your thoughts and making sure you didn't say something stupid that, you ended up hanging yourselves with. Yeah, you might worry about it, because if you have talked about it, you're going to like, oh, man, who did I talk to? Now, that is not someone necessarily who's acting guilty. It could be somebody that knows the consequences of, what a slip up could have done, how a slip up could, derail him. So you want to be very careful when something along that line comes up. Think about it. As a judge, he's seen prosecutors get people to hang themselves on their own words, and the police get people to hang themselves on their own words, probably hundreds, if not thousands of times. So I'm sure he was sort of processing where the line of inquiry was going here and what he might have done, either purposely, to be fair, or more likely inadvertently, that could end his nomination. In my view, he was being careful about what he said. And, who knows, if he had been talking to somebody that he shouldn't have about, in details that he shouldn't have, to a degree that he shouldn't have. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. You don't know. He would know. The persons that he talked with, they would know, but nobody else is going to know. So he said that he doesn't remember anything precisely talking to anybody that he shouldn't have, basically. And so I have to proceed on the presumption that he didn't. I'm not going to say that he didn't do anything wrong, but I am going to defend him based upon the presumption of innocence. Him being careful is not probative here. He and everyone else should be careful, very careful, whether guilty or innocent, when a prosecutor or a police officer, for that matter, clearly has a bullseye painted on you and is trying to end your career. That's just a natural and wise man and good thinking being displayed. When it comes to Senator Harris, though, I'm only coming up with she's either the worst prosecutor I've ever seen, or she never had the goods, or she's corrupt. If she had the goods and she didn't use them, oh, come on. Jesus, I mean, the only reason that she wouldn't use them is she got paid not to use them, and I don't believe that. If she had the goods and didn't use them because she was completely incompetent, no, I mean, come on, guys. She was perfectly willing, and all of the senators on the Democratic side were perfectly willing to drag every loose allegation whatsoever with names and details, uncorroborated, stacked to the ceiling, and bring that before the public and try to destroy Judge Kavanaugh's reputation. Why would she stop if she had the actual goods that could actually bring them down? I don't see that as plausible. I mean, think about it. They were willing to insinuate that he was a terrible person for drinking beer, willing to have a circus about, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. How long did that thing go on? About sexual allegations that had no corroboration whatsoever, and therefore no business being aired in a public Senate hearing. Given the lengths that they were going on about these other issues that I don't think had any bearing on whether or not he's qualified to be a justice of the Supreme Court. Whether he did something as a teenager that was even a felony sex crime when he was a teenager, when he's 50-something now, it has no bearing to me. 17-year-old boys and 17-year-old girls do things that should not end their lives and should not prevent them from becoming either the president or the Supreme Court justice, even if it's sexual in nature. Now, if it had been a full-blown accomplished rape, yeah, maybe you just don't want the court to be, have that asterisk on Justice Kavanaugh's career if it had been a full-blown rape. But this, where he was recently one of the biggest legal and political issues of our time had been before him, and he was improperly discussing the case with somebody he shouldn't have been. Yeah, that is material as to whether he should be on the Supreme Court. So given the lengths that they were willing to spend on these immaterial issues, but here, when they had a material issue and they raised the specter of it, but they didn't pursue it any further. Come on. Most likely, you'd have to think by the preponderance of the evidence standard, you just have to come to the conclusion that they never had any evidence at all. They never did put any evidence. There was no evidence at all given that there was any improper communications whatsoever. In fact, all you have is evidence to the contrary. So Senator Harris, it appears, as a prosecutor, knew that she didn't have the goods and nevertheless used her position to damage the reputation of the judge just so she could go on a fishing expedition and make herself look like an idiot to me. But if you read the YouTube comments from the PBS video that I use here, well, to those people, she came across as someone fighting the good fight. Well, bullshit. She was being underhanded, plain and simple. If you got a credible case of corruption, present it, or shut your stupid pie hole. Baseless accusations have no place between civilized, decent, honorable human beings.